a message while I'm grabbing the coffee. Camera.
I sincerely hope that I'm not coming off as this Leica fanboy, because I really don't want to be. I love this camera, I love the brand, but let's get one thing clear. A Leica is just a box that captures light. It's the only full-frame rangefinder system, the only full-frame true rangefinder system, and that's why I bought one. But I am not sucking up to the brand. I'm not sucking up to the brand, and I just shut my pants. My name is Tibo Desaegher. I am a PhD student at Ghent University first and a photographer second, skater third, I think. And yeah, I use photography as this creative supplement to my otherwise pretty rational and not boring, but kind of predictive life. I class myself as a amateur street and documentary photographer, so I bring a camera basically 24/7. I even have one on me in the lab, and I take pictures of whatever happens in my life, be my daily walks to work, from work, this skate park I go to every day or every week at least, and then just street photography in and around Ghent.
So basically you're not a professional street photographer, you're just an amateur. Mm-hmm. You're not doing this for a living, right?
No, I hate the terms amateur and professional. I only use them in the strictly objective way, as you make your living with it or you don't. And in that sense, I absolutely do not. I have my day job, and photography is just this creative tool for me. And otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily want photography to be my main source of income, because then it would just, in my mind, become this tool. Because that's the way my mind works is whenever I make money off of something, it truly becomes work, and it's often sucks the enjoyment out of it. So I would never want that to happen with photography.
So basically you're meaning if you would be paid for your street photography work, you'd be less passionate about it?
It's my prognosis. Of course, I can't know for sure because I haven't been paid for my street photography work. But based on how I've gone through my life, I know that if something becomes, or I've become dependent on something to make an income, I am a perfectionist, and I will strive to do everything perfectly, and then that sucks the joy out of it. So keeping it amateur and keeping it just for fun kind of assures me that it doesn't have to be perfect, that it's just for me to be creative and to loosen up my mind from time to time, and that makes me enjoy it more and ensures that I will enjoy it forever. Ooh, that's already a pretty deep question.
I made my homework, so
I kind of did too. I think, well, the thing is, I don't limit myself strictly to street photography, so I also do skateboarding, etc. But I think documentary, and I call it documentary photography, but I think documentary and street are kind of the same thing. I think the main thing that attracts me in street photography is it's, on the one hand, it's pretty easy to do. You can do it whenever and wherever you are. Hence, I do it when going to work or going from work. I live close to the railway station in Ghent, so I can, during work, I can quickly take like 45 minutes and do a couple of street laps. And I also just enjoy the fact that street photography is like this open book, and everyone sees the world in their own way and in different ways. There's these big styles in street photography. You have like the candid, more traditional street photography. You have the modern, which is more abstract and more geometry based. But then everyone just finds their little way in and around it, and you can quickly find your style. And I think that's the reason it attracts me. It's this combination of just pure and raw simplicity and absolute freedom, combined with these limitless possibilities of doing your own thing and finding your own style. It isn't necessarily based off purely street photographers. Of course, I enjoyed the classics like Cartier-Bresson and Winograd, etc. Those are good, and Frank, those are really important to me. But the ones that always stick to me and would make my top three, the first one would be Van Ho. which is lesser known, but he's the reason I got into this street photography and documentary style of photography, and he still remains to be the biggest inspiration for my style. There's this image of his, of this, I don't know names of images, but of the boatman in this big alleyway. Has these big blooming highlights contrasted with the near deep, completely crushed blacks, and everything is like ethereal and abstract and kind of anonymous. That would be my absolute top.
The second one?
Closely followed by Ernst Haas, because Ernst Haas introduced me to firstly color, because when I started street photography, I shot black and white for about a year and a half, because that was where I was comfortable, and it's Ernst Haas that kind of pulled me out of this black and white. Coincidentally, he's also one of the first who did color street photography, but he also introduced me to another concept, which was motion in street photographs, his images of taxis, etc. So that's where I had the abstract and geometry and lighting from Van Ho, and then I tried to combine it with the abstract color work and the motion, etc. from Ernst Haas. And then the third photographer isn't strictly a street photographer, he's more of a documentary photographer. It would be a Belgian, Stefan van Vleteren. And I think he rounds out my trio because he captures emotion in a way that I've never seen. Most of the time it's sad emotions, it's misery and depression and sadness. But he just does it in this like candid and effortless way. So those three combined would make my ideal style of photography. It's abstract, it's based on geometry and light, it's more anonymous than surrounding the person in the photograph themselves. I like to use color, I like to use motion if it's necessary, but with everything I want to convey kind of the emotion that I was feeling or that I was getting from the scene itself. Oof. I think there's two answers to this question. Because if you send something to an art gallery, there's a personal goal that you want to get your image that you like the most in an art gallery, but you also want to get an image that would be most impactful on others, and that those are not necessarily the same. For me, I think the most impactful image is an image I made in Ghent. It's a really, well, to me, it's a really depressing image, and I implicitly promised myself that I would never make profit off of this image because I was in conflict if I would make it or not. It's a pretty basic image, but it's just a man in misery. So that would be the one that I would put in galleries just to try and impact people and try to well, open their mind to the misery that's going on, because it was taken in 2020 and it was, well, kind of reflecting, I think, how the world population was feeling at that time. So that would be the one that would impact people. If I would want to have my favorite image in there, I think I'd have to go with like a skateboarding image, because the way I've been documenting skateboarding, first and foremost, skateboarding saves lives. That's the main thing I want to convey with my images, and it's also kind of art. It's not this vandalizing and aggressive sport that society often tries to portray it as. And there's this one image of a friend of mine called Josse, and he's doing a frontside air over a hip, and it's just pure simplicity. So it feels kind of like a street image to me. It's perfectly simple. There's not a lot going on. The only thing that you see is the quarter, which is like this big hip quarter, and it's him flying over, and the light, it was kind of evening light. It's black and white, so you can't see, and the evening light was kind of cutting across the image as well. And the cool thing is Josse was doing this frontside air, and it was going perfectly over the hip itself, but the light was falling in a way that his one leg was dark and his one leg was bright. And at that day he was wearing these pants that he has, that is one black leg and one white leg, and it was just perfect with the shadow. And it's anonymous, you can't see that it's Josse. Well, people that know him of course do. And I think that would be the perfect image to kind of display what I want to achieve with photography. It's this, everything I learned from street photography and everything I like in street photography, copy-pasted onto whatever I want to document. And up until this point, it's been just skateboarding. because that's my main interest for the past few years outside of just street photography, and I think that would be my personal favorite to hang in a gallery.
Was it skate photography that came first, or street photography that was first? And the second question related to your skate series is, do you think like going out on the streets improves your skate photography?
First part of the question, I thank skateboarding for photography. I was a downhill skater at first, so the ones that like snowboard on asphalt, and I got really badly injured about 4 or 5 years ago, I think 5 years ago, at the first year of university. And I had this knee injury where I could still walk and run and do everything, but when I tried to skate, it would hurt, and it would hurt for a couple of weeks. So at that point, at that time of my life, skateboarding was everything I had to kind of contradict my academic career. And I was really going at it in my academic career, so I was really working very hard, and I had skateboarding to balance it out and to kind of keep myself in this mental balance, as to say. And all of a sudden that fell away. I couldn't do it anymore. And it was really, well, it was kind of a lower point in my life, as to say. I'm pretty young, but still, I felt really bad. And I would still go to these sessions with my friends because those were my only friends, and that was the only place I kind of felt happy again.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine started his own brand back then, and he was taking photos and video for that brand. And at a certain point, he skates as well, and I was like, well, I'll just take the pictures. And I started taking these images of my friends downhill skateboarding, and I think that's when it kind of clicked. And then the second part of the question, I think I learned a lot from street photography that I implement on skateboarding. The question you asked with my best image, it's my best image in my mind because I used all of the principles from Van Gogh, Ernst Haas, and Stefan van Vleteren, and all other photographers, street photographers and documentary photographers that I really like, and I copy-pasted it onto skateboarding, and I think that's the reason why. Skateboard photography has kind of these rules and these standards, and I kind of adapted this freedom and this freedom from street photography onto it. So yeah, I definitely learned from street photography.
Nothing is random, mate.
Nothing is random, everything is connected. So now I have 4 cameras, and all of them I keep, and I don't sell them because they have these personal stories attached to them. So I'm at this point where that's probably my main criteria. It's I want to have a connection with the camera, otherwise I won't keep it. I don't care about specs, really. So I have 2 branches of cameras, as you can say, but I use them throughout everything. If I do skateboard photography, I use my Fuji X-H1 a lot, which I didn't bring today, because hence I don't use it for street photography that often. Then on the other hand, if I want to do purely street photography, my weapon of choice these days is the Leica M10. I have a very special connection with this camera from the day I bought it. Just buying itself was an experience, a story I will never forget. So I have this very special connection with it, but I don't really care that it's a Leica. It's a very stereotypical thing to say, but I don't care about the brand. The only thing I wanted was like I wanted a true rangefinder experience, and I would love to couple it to a full frame sensor. And at this point, there's only one brand that really provides that, and that's Leica. So you're out of luck. But then I tape off the logos because I don't really care.
Okay. But people will continue to say that you're a Leica fanboy. So
still, yeah.
Once you own a Leica, you're a fanboy. So.
But let's be honest. There is one thing that does feel kind of nice, and it's not that you're shooting a Leica. It's not about bragging that you have a Leica, but it just feels nice to have a camera that has like 100 years of history going through it, and like that this is the modern day version of the tool that your favorite photographers has used. Van Gogh didn't use one. Van Gogh used a Hasselblad, I think, or a Rolleiflex. But Ernst Haas, Gary Winograd, Joel Meyerowitz, they all used Leicas, and it's a very cool thing to know that when you shoot with this thing and you look through the viewfinder, you can kind of feel like this is how it's been done. And it's limiting in a way, but also kind of freeing in a way. So that's why I like it for street photography. It's just the most compact, full frame rangefinder package you can get, the only one. So that's why I use it for street photography, but it's also become my everyday kind of camera. And then there's also one camera that kind of sits in between skateboarding and street photography, and that's the only one I brought as well.
And this is the camera that I had the honor to shoot with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the X Pro 2. And I have the graphite grey version, so it's kind of special already in a way. It's not like a special edition, but you know that this is less common than the black ones. But this one, I bought it just before the pandemic. So I bought it and then I got locked down. And this kind of became, because I've only had my Leica since last year November. But this was the camera that I kind of documented how I transitioned through COVID with. So that's why I have a special connection with this. And also, I think, price for performance, this is probably the best street photography camera you can buy still in 2021.
And what are the focal lenses that you use for Leica and for Fuji?
So I have this logical side of my brain and I have the passionate side. The logical side uses 35mm. And I have this weird thing. I like 35mm on full frame, but I don't like the equivalents on crop sensors. It's still a 23mm lens, so it has the same field of view and it's equivalent to it, but it doesn't have the same feel, it doesn't have like the three-dimensionality, as to say. So I don't really like using this. I love it on a Leica, or on any full-frame sensor, for that matter. But on the Fuji I still use it as like the rational focal length, because my favorite focal length of all time is a 50mm. But I am objective in the way that I know that a 50mm is often also limiting your possibilities, and especially if you are in this one camera for everything kind of branch, then a 35 is just more logical to use. I had a brief stint with a 28, but that's too wide for me. I can use it, but then I found that I had to crop so much that it's just not beneficial to shoot with it anymore. Hi.
You know what? I think this is a pretty good place
for another interview session?
Yeah, to talk about a little bit of your series that I would not call cinematic, but I'm gonna call moody or maybe
you
poetic.
You can call them cinematic. Yeah.
I hate the word. Everything is cinematic these days, right?
Yeah.
Epic and cinematic. This is the
epic, cinematic, and moody, and wow, that's really cool.
Man, you look like you're in Morocco here with the palm trees and the sun with the...
Welcome guys, POV street photography in Marrakesh. Stekene.
Stekene. Okay, so the series in Stekene.
Well, the hometown series really, in the beginning when I started photography, I live in a small village called Stekene. And it's this small village in the middle between Antwerp and Ghent, and it's very rural. And it's, well, they often make jokes like World War II hasn't happened here, etc. And then in the beginning, I had this stereotypical idea, like you can't do photography here, you have to go to these like very exotic places to make good images, etc. More of the mind of a landscape photographer, as to say. But then, of course, I started doing street photography, but then the rural city is not good for street photography either. We have like 1 or 2 streets that are, well, have buildings, or a lot of buildings. But then COVID happened, of course, and just out of complete boredom, I started taking these laps around my hometown with my dad with the bicycle. So we do like 15, 20 kilometers a night. And I started to see Stekene in these very special conditions. Because during the day it's beautiful to go take a walk, but it's just shitty for images still. But then I think the moment clicked for me on the Easter morning last year, in the first Easter in lockdown. There was like these very unusual conditions of low-hanging mist on these fields, and the sun was beaming into it and was evaporating or sublimating the mist. And I just remember, like, it clicked to me, like, even the most boring place can be a photographic gold mine if you just apply the right conditions to it. And that's where this kind of hometown series began in my mind, because of course I'm emotionally connected to Stekene. I've lived there all my life, and most of the spots I photograph in this series are spots that I've been going for 10 years or plus. But then in these special conditions, during frost in the winter, or during morning mist, or during purely golden hour even, they kind of transform how I view it. And then I dedicated myself to try and document not only my life in COVID, but just how Stekene can be viewed from my point of view. So most of the images are kind of, well, precise in a manner. My compositions, I tried, my perfectionism just comes out, and they're very precise. It's not just look at this beautiful tree in the mist. It has to be precise, it has to be simple, it has to be digestible, for people to just quickly glance at it and kind of comprehend what is going on, but still have questions as well. And that's where the series kind of grew, and kind of also became like an open love letter to Stekene as well. I really grew to appreciate it through the lockdown, which is a stereotypical thing to say, but nonetheless very important. And these photographs are like my documentation of how I learned to appreciate the simple things. These greenhouses that light up with golden tones during golden hour, or these fields that completely fill with mist, and then my dad just walks into it and it's just his silhouette with these light rays beaming over, and it feels like you're in Blade Runner 2049. Kind of harkens back to what we were talking about with the history of street photography, is where it's important to find your own style, but it's also important to see what others have done that really works. And my style in street photography is in big contrast. It's more modern, it's abstract, etc. So it's not the classical Gary Winograd, John Meyerowitz style. But I wanted to push myself to at least try that style. I don't feel like I'm very good at confrontational photography, but I wanted to give it a shot as well. But I set a set of ground rules for myself. If I would make images that revolve around the subject alone, and where the subject or the person is the main subject of the image, and there's not necessarily anything going around, I would prefer it to be anonymous. So the images of the cowboy, the one that I posted, I have a lot more. They're all anonymous. You can't see his face. Well, there's one you can see his face where he's walking in, but that's not the best image. But the ones that I really like focus around just simply the hat. That's why I call it the sheriff as well. And then just his dresser and the way he behaves himself, because you can clearly see he's in a lot of misery. So that's the first ground rule. And the second ground rule is that I want it to be candid. I don't want to be forced. I love street portraits. And there's beautiful work that's just focused on street portraits, and I think it's very important work as well, to give people the opportunity to show themselves. But that's not necessarily what I want to go to, because I'm not a shy person, but I'm not very impulsive as well. I won't approach someone and instantly start talking. I can do that, and when I feel comfortable, I can do it pretty well, but it's not something I would do every day. So with the sheriff, the good thing about Jens and Pieters and the good thing about shooting railway stations is because there's always people. Two, they're often very cool in architecture, or a lot of them are. And three, there's also always people, but there's a healthy mix of people you've never seen before and characters that repeat themselves. They come there every day. So when I tried to get out of my comfort zone, I said, okay, I'm not very good at this, so I would like to give myself some opportunities, and I would like to make like these little mini documentary series about people that go there every single day. So I'm at Jens and Pieters 3 times a week for the past 3 years. So I know most of the people that come there, and the regulars are often people that are struggling financially. So it's and then you have to be very delicate with the way you photograph them, because you can't just sit there, oh, you look cool because you're homeless, take an image. You have to be very delicate, and I wanted to portray them in kind of their pride, you know, and kind of their unique personality, and wanted to give them the shot, without them knowing, of displaying who they are. The sheriff is the best example of him, because he's clearly someone that's struggling, but he has like this cowboy hat, and he still wears his belt and still wears a nice vest, etc. So I wanted to photograph him in that manner, but then the photographs I take of him are him mostly at like a quarter angle from the back. It was actually wider because I was standing on this bench and he was sitting right next to me. But I wasn't necessarily focusing on him, I was focusing on something else that was happening in front of me. And I use rangefinders because if they're up to my eye, I can still look down and see reflections in my screen to look behind me. So it's kind of this weird thing I do, but I do it as well. I do it often to see what's happening behind me as well. And I saw just flashes going off. So my brain was tickled, and I looked and I saw him just lighting, it's like this big cigar even. And it was like in his hand, and I was at the perfect angle to like just show the light in his hand and his hat, etc. So I just turned myself, I zone focused pretty quickly, and I just snapped a shot. And the original image is crooked, first of all, and it's him and then just a couple of just tiles of floor. So I cropped it to just a vertical perspective, and it's very tight around him, but I also liked it because it has to be around, it has to be focused on him. The image is very important to me, partially because it's the reason I bring a camera everywhere I go, was because I was literally just going to grab a Coca-Cola from the store that's 100 meters from my apartment in Ghent. That was the reason I was out. And I saw him sitting there, and he was actually asleep at first. He was inside of this corner of the church that they're demolishing, or part of the church is being demolished, and he was sitting next to the cross. So I noticed him sitting there. And I looked around because I didn't really comprehend what he was doing, and I saw like the bench close to it that had like 2 empty bottles of Edelstoff vodka. So I made a mental puzzle of what was happening. And then I actually stood there for, not kidding, like 5 to 10 minutes. He was still asleep, debating like, is it right to make this image? Because this man is clearly not at a place he wants to be in his life. And then I took the image. I only made one, and it's the one I portray. And it's actually when he opens his eyes, because you can't really see it on Instagram, but his eyes are open, he's awake. And then I just quickly put my camera away. And I'm still battling sometimes the fact that I took the image, because I don't fully feel good about it still. But the promise I made with it is I'm never going to use this image solely to publish myself as a photographer. I'm never going to try and, I'm forbidding myself to profit off of this image, and I'll profit off of his misery.
I'm just gonna cut it for a second here, okay?
That I will look back on in a few years, that like kind of shaped how I approach photography, I think, because it made me think about photography and why we do this, and if we can do this a lot. And I think it's a very important image for my personal development, therefore. But I feel bad about publishing it or selling it as a print, for example. I would never do that.
Yeah.
If an art gallery wants to make like an exhibition about me, I think the image should be there. But I would explicitly state that I wouldn't want to sell it as like an additional print at the end of the exposition or something. I'm really talking big dreams now, but it's an image I'm personally in conflict with, but I also love. And it's the closest I've ever gotten to what Stefan van Vleteren does. Because he's a master at this, like documenting this misery and this decay of people in a candid and perfect way. And it's the closest I've ever gotten to his work. So I'm proud of making that image. Not that it's a difficult image to make, but it's more of a difficult psychological decision for me. But I inherently forbid myself to profit off of this,
I fully understand.
Commercially and financially. Her and the sheriff kind of fill in this other spot, so it's all in this mind state of characters and against St. Peter's, because all of them are in financial or other types of misery and trouble, and I all appear regularly at St. Peter's or close to St. Peter's. I live next to it. But then the reason I took her picture is she very obviously has financial problems. And that is a big no-go in my mind, to just take an image of that. But then she always dresses up, she's always wearing dresses, and she always wears makeup, and she still behaves in this like manner that's fueled by pride and just personal confidence, and she wears herself very big, and I just love that. And she was standing there in that corner completely unaware of me, because I was standing next to a pillar, so she couldn't see me, and I was wrapping my camera around the pillar using live view and then shooting. But she stood there with like the cigarette in her hand, with like this posture of look at me, but then you can still see the bags around her, so that's an indication of she's not in the best place of her life. But I just wanted to capture it because she's so proud, and I wanted to show people that that even those kind of people that are in a lot of misery and in a lot of problems can still feel proud and are still individuals. So I wanted to do it kind of for her, as to say it in a stereotypical way, but it was still outside of my comfort zone, and it was still something I had to push myself to do. But I'm very happy I have those images. My hopes and dreams in street photography would be the easier question to answer. I think primarily I just want to grow as a photographer, but especially as a street photographer. I am at only the earliest stages of my development, and I want to continuously upgrade and continuously learn, as well through history, as well through personal experience. So that's my hope and dream, is to just at the end of this year be at a place where I couldn't imagine myself being skillful wise, but also just regarding my philosophy. I think the biggest thing I'm working on right now with street photography is not necessarily the projects, because as I said, I have this potential Hans and Peters project, I have this potential stake in a project that I could publish as a zine, but I think this year I want to focus more on the philosophical side of street photography. I want to really understand, if I'm going to do this, why do I do this? Why me personally? How do I do this personally, and why? But also what the history is, why it's important that street photography exists. They're all pretty obvious questions, I think, and you can answer them pretty rapidly, but I want to really get to the bottom of them, and really understand what and why. For example, I'm buying a lot of books. Since the pandemic happened, I've bought like 13 or 14 street photography books, which are not that cheap either. But then I buy them and I intensively study them for a couple of weeks. I really want to get the nitty and gritty. I really want to understand how each photographer's style actually works. So that's my biggest hope and dream, is at the end of this year I want to be at a deeper understanding of street photography, of its history, of its significance, of its role play in society as well. And then for society, I also hope that by the end of this year we will be more open again, because I think last year, 2020, 2021, people are so apprehensive on the street, and they're kind of anxious, and they see cameras and they immediately get introverted. They also just in general only get out to go somewhere. They don't go out to enjoy themselves as much. So it's very hard to get these intimate and candid interactions between people. So I hope for society that actually naturally progresses. I have this suspicion that if COVID closes, the chapter closes, which will not be a discrete closure, but it will be kind of like a continuous transition. But as we get under a certain bar, as to say, that everyone will just naturally gravitate towards their normal life again. Because I think even though COVID has happened for a year and a half, most people have lived their lives for 20 years plus without it. So I think we will naturally gravitate more toward it again, when we will shake hands again and we will be more candid. And what I really want to do is, when that bar is reached and when the COVID chapter closes, is kind of a project that I have in my mind. It's like the resurgence. I want to the world opening up and really living again. The cafes being open again is a first step, for example. But I want to capture that that sense of freedom returning, and then contrast it with the pictures I described earlier of the sheriff and the guy at the cross and the women. I want to contrast it with those kinds of pictures, people in misery, which are not necessarily connected to COVID, but of course poverty rates and the percentage of people being homeless has increased through COVID tremendously, and contrast that with the resurgence, and try to make this a net gain of zero. It's misery and it's happiness. And then my biggest regrets in street photography,
if you have one, huh?
Not buying a Leica. No, I think my biggest regret in street photography was conforming to what I thought was the normality. In the beginning, I got into street photography. My first image was on film, and as an image I still hold dear to my heart. I think it's still one of my best street images ever. Don't think it's on my Instagram anymore. No. And I want to get back to that style. but then I regret straying away from it, because then I got into like this stylized cinematographic style and this perfectionist way of street photography, and I like it and it's my niche, but I also want to incorporate those kinds of images. I'll send you the image I'm talking about, the first one, so you can put it on screen. It's I'll quickly describe it. It's like this, it's a homeless man again, but he's laying on this mattress close to like a wall, and on the wall is a big billboard of H&M, and it's a campaign of a woman, and she's like laying in the same manner, but she's completely happy and completely fine, and then he is in misery. And at that moment it clicked.
I'm not aware of this picture. I didn't see it.
It's probably somewhere on my Instagram, but it's deep.
So what was your regret?
Regret is that I strayed away from those kinds of images in the beginning, and I took tele lenses and took like these very stylized images that you see on social media a lot, portrayed as street photography. Not saying that it isn't, again. But then I see this, I buy these books of Ernst Haas and Robert Frank, the Americans, for example, and you see how street photography plays a role in documenting how life is going and what is happening, and the hardships of life and also the happiness of life. And I regret straying away from that a little bit, which is why I want to tend more towards documentary photographer in general. Not just capture how beautiful life can be around us in a graphical way, but also capture what is happening.
Oh,
damn.
That's a good shot there.
Ah, God. You wanted to get coffee, man.
It was a really good coffee, huh?
FYI, if I want to give a tip, don't, if you go out, don't buy coffee. You'll miss shots like that. You can't see it, but it was a beautiful shot. No, if I would have to give tips, is don't get stuck in the gear. It doesn't really matter. Like I use a Leica M10. You could easily use a 15-year-old camera. You could even use your iPhone. I know a lot of people that start out using their iPhone. And not just a stereotypical thing. It's just not get stuck in the gear. Dig into the philosophy as well. Why we do this and how we do this. And good channels for that, I think, is buy books by Gary Winograd, by Joel Meyerowitz, by Elliot Irving, etc. Buy those books. I think Magnum Photography, their website should be in your bookmarks. If you want to be a street photographer, you should look at those websites every single day. And there's channels on YouTube, as I said, John Free, I referenced him. Sean Tucker is a very good one. The Art of Photography is also a very good channel that go into depth, and it's boring videos to watch, I know. It's 20 minutes talking with some sample images, but that's how you really progress. Things are looking up. Things are getting better for street photographers in 2021, and everything is clearing up again, and people are less anxious. So I think it'll get better for everyone, eventually.
That's a good way to end this episode.
Pretty hopeful thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tibo, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and follow Tibo on Instagram and show him some love.
If you want.
And yeah, thank you very much. Cheers.